Okay, Assalamualaikum and good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. So first let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Rumaizah Nordin and I'll be responsible for hosting this webinar today. So just an introduction, this webinar is organized by students of the Environmental Toxicology and Industrial Module together with the technical team under the Department of Community Health, Medicine Faculty, Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. So today it's all about an update on environmental toxic metal exposure and mental health. And as we all should know, heavy metals have harmful effects on human health, and exposure to these metals have been increased by modern industrialization and also human anthropogenic activities. So the heavy metals that are most commonly associated with poisoning of humans are lead, mercury, arsenic, and also cadmium. Although a large number of studies have demonstrated their damage to the biological function of the human being, their potential association with mental health remain under discussion. So since this program is only under 2 hours, so for today we have chosen to talk about lead and its role in mental health issue. So without wasting any more time, first we would like to start this webinar with an introductory speech by Associate Prof. Dr. Muhammad Hasni bin Jaafar, Medical Lecturer at the Faculty of Medicine UKM in the field of public health, specializing in environmental health and toxicology.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and good morning, everybody. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. I start with the name of the mighty God for blessing us today with good health and allowing us to attend this webinar about the environmental toxic metal and mental health. Mental health is among the important issue now in this country. Everybody talking about this health problem, not only among the healthcare profession, but also policy makers at other ministries like the Department of Environment, Ministry of Education, religious, and many more. It has become an important topic in this 21st century in this country. Most of the time, genetic and stress factor have been identified as a risk. They have been discussed in many platforms, including textbooks that are related with the mental health. Unfortunately, not many been discussed or been documented for the heavy metal, and also for other pollutants like solvent and pesticide. They also have impact on brain and also on the neural behavior status. Alhamdulillah, this webinar is one of the coursework in this FK 6953, Industrial and Environmental Toxicology. In this one semester module, all DrPH scholars are exposed to the basic and intermediate toxicology and various important heavy metal, including lead. And today, lead here, their work on the update of lead on the mental health. So again, I welcome everybody to this webinar. Congratulations to all candidates who successfully planned and conduct this webinar today. And also to our supporting staff at the department who also contribute significantly today. Jazakallah khairan and Assalamualaikum. I hope you all will enjoy and have a fruitful webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Hasni, for the speech. Okay, before we start with the first speaker, we would like to play a short video for our audience. And before that, I will also like to go through some housekeeping for today's webinar. Firstly, please mute your microphone, okay, and turn off your video. If you have any question during the webinar, you can type them into the Zoom chat box window and we will address them during the question and answer session. And we'd like to remind you also that we will also have a Kahoot session at the end of the webinar so that you yourself can answer question And the top 3 winners will win Ringgit Malaysia 100 cash. So make sure you pay attention to the presentation. All right, now let us watch the introductory video. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the video and feel a bit fresh and motivated listening to the heavy metal background music. So without any further delay, I will now would like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Mohd Hafiz Baharuddin. Dr. Mohd Hafiz is one of the candidates for Doctor of Public Health, UKM, previously working in Pejabat Kesihatan Daerah Hulu Langat. Dr. Hafiz's topic of presentation will be on what is lead, benefit versus harm.
Assalamualaikum, a very good morning to our fellow friends. Today, the topic of the webinar, an update on mental health and toxic metal exposure in the environment, will be presented by me, Dr. Mohd Hafiz Baharuddin. The heavy metal that we are concerned today will be lead. The second name will be pumble. Okay, this is the outline of our presentation today. The introduction, toxicokinetic and toxicodynamic of lead. So introduction, what is lead? Its sources, routes of exposure, and global burden. Lead is a hazardous element that occurs naturally in the Earth's crust. Its broad usage has caused in widespread environmental contamination, human exposure, and serious public health issues in many areas in the world. So among the sources of lead that we are commonly attributed to are lead acid batteries, fuels, paints, jewelries, ammunition, even toys that we give to our children, and traditional medicine. Among the routes of exposure of lead are through inhalation of lead particles generated by burning materials containing lead, for example, during smelting, recycling, stripping leaded paints, and using leaded aviation fuel. Second one will be injection of lead contaminated dust, water from leaded pipes, and food from leaded glazed or leaded soldered containers. Okay. On the global burden of lead, the highest burden was in low and middle income countries. The Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation, IHME, estimated that in 2019, lead exposure accounted for 900,000 deaths, 21.7 million years of healthy life lost due to long-term effects on health. So 7% of it causes global burden of ischemic heart disease 8% causes hypertensive heart disease, 5% causes global burden in stroke, and 62.5% causes global burden of developmental intellectual disabilities whose cause is not obvious. Toxicological properties, including sources of properties of lead, NOEL, waste absorption, distribution, biotransformation, excretion, and bioaccumulation. We go on the physiochemical properties of lead, plumbum. Its molecular weight is 207.2. It's bluish and grayish color, solid state, with melting point of 327 degrees and boiling point of 1007. It has no odor. It is insoluble in water of 25 degrees and have a vapor pressure of 1.577 millimeter mercury at 1000 degrees. Okay. Its special characteristic shows that it is waterproof, radiation shielding. It has weather resistant properties and also resistant to corrosion. On the lower part of plumbum, the dose of chemical at which where no statistically or biologically significant increase in frequency or severity of adverse effect seen between the exposed population and its appropriate control. So NOEL for increased blood erythrocyte protein EP levels in infants and children exists at 15 to 70 micrograms per deciliter. That is very low. In adults, it ranges between 25 to 30 microgram per deciliter. For females alone, it ranges around 20 to 25. So on the minimal risk limit of plumbum, for most studied endpoints, neurological, renal, cardiovascular, hematological, immunological, reproductive, and developmental, the effects occurs at the lowest plumbum study, which is less than 5 micrograms per deciliter. Because the lowest dose are associated with serious adverse effect, which is declining cognitive function in children, and the minimal risk limit for plumbum has not been derived. So for example, for NOEL for adults, we can see that at levels of 80, anemia would occur. Even in levels of 30, altered testicular function would occur for adults. And for children, at lowest of even 15 will cause mental development index deficits and reduced gestational age and birth weight and perinatal exposure. Even causes vitamin D metabolism interference. All right. So we'll continue on with the absorption of lead. So lead can be absorbed through ingestion, inhalation. Ingestion lead exposure in general population, including children, occurs primarily through ingestion, and it makes the route that most commonly leads to elevated BLL. From 20 to 70% of ingested lead is absorbed into the body, with children generally absorbing a higher percentage than adults. In children is more, right? So inhalation-wise, inhalation is the second major pathway of exposure for general population. The amount absorbed for the respiratory system depends on the particle size, respiratory volume, amount of deposition, and mucociliary clearance of the inhaled lead. So smaller particles gets into the lung and distributed to other parts of the body in blood. So larger particles will be coughed out or swallowed. And it could be also be absorbed by dermal and endogenous exposure. So dermal exposure plays a role for exposed to organic lead among workers, but it's not considered a significant pathway for general population. Dust and soil containing lead will get into the skin and might pass through if the skin breaks and enter the bloodstream, or ingested when it's not washed properly. Through endogenous exposure, lead poisoning may result from retained bullet or shrapnel fragments. Thus, a history of military or other penetrating trauma may be important to rule out endogenous exposure. A pregnant woman may possess a particular risk for developing a fetus because transplacental exposure to unborn child can happen if mother is exposed to lead. On the distribution of lead, in blood, it is mostly absorbed by 99% in erythrocyte, with a half-life of 20 to 40 days. Concentration of lead in blood varies with age and state of a person. In soft tissue, relatively amounts of lead in soft tissue are in 33% in the liver. Skeletal muscle takes up 18%, skin 16%. Whereas in bone, the trabecular bone during childhood and both the cortical and trabecular bone in the adulthood. with the half-life of years to decades. Okay. So on biotransformation of lead, lead reduces the activity of various enzymes, causing changes in their structure and inhibits the activity by competing with necessary cations for binding sites. So when this ionic lead rapidly forms insoluble participates with organic phosphate and ion, it limits its solubility in plasma. So all these acryl leads can be metabolized by cytochrome P450 enzyme from tetra to tri and inorganic pumlum. So pumlum causes dysfunction on the activity as well of G6PD. This will lead to anemia, as I mentioned just now. So the presence of lead in the body can cause rapid depletion of antioxidants in the body and can increase the production of reactive oxygen and reactive nitrogen. Thus, it increases the oxidative stress, causing reduction in levels of glutathione reductase, leading to a reduction in concentration of the antioxidant glutathione. So, with that excretion part of lead, 2/3 of lead is excreted through urinary loss in adults, whereas 1/3 will be lost through fecal lead loss, okay, through biliary elimination. Okay, and about 8% of the total eliminated is through hair and nails. So whole body elimination over the short term removes around 50 to 60% of newly absorbed lead, with a half-life in adult volunteers about 20 days, because the half-life in blood is 20 to 40 days. So of the deposited fraction, 50%, where 25% lead is initially absorbed, it is eventually eliminated. Infants and child, as I mentioned just now, retains around 50% of ingested lead, where infant, perhaps preschool children, have slower elimination than adults. So lead elimination through urine might depend on concentration, on the basis that result of study shows that reported blood urine and values in adults. So wholly blood lead retention in humans subjected to constant exposure is accounted for largely by the skeletal accumulation. So bioaccumulation of lead, where we can see that emission of pollution from factory, houses, petrol station will bring all the lead through wind direction to causing wet and dry deposition, where it will accumulate in animals, in plants, and in waters. So all this bioaccumulation in food may be ingested by our human body, and its uptake will cause metabolism, distribution, and storage, causing multiple health effects. Right? So for bioaccumulation in food, through ingestion, through the intestine, inhalation through the air, through the lungs, pollution through absorption from the skin will eventually lead to the plasma and will be absorbed by the erythrocytes in the blood. So blood will bring 50% of the lead that is not excreted to the bones. And the next 50% will enter to the soft tissue, where liver will go through bowels and will be removing lead through feces, which is 1/3 of the elimination. Urine will be removing 2/3 of the lead, whereas 8%, as I mentioned, will come out through hair and nails. And among the health effects that it will occur will be from the reproductive effect, respiratory, neurological, and other effects. Then we will go on to the third part, the toxicodynamic, where mechanism of action of lead and lead poisoning. So the main mechanism behind lead poisoning on the brain is that lead can substitute calcium, where it could pass through to the blood-brain barrier, where the metabolic inhibitors suggest the back transport of lead via calcium ATPase pump. Uptake of lead via pituitary, GH2, glial, C6, and HEK293 cells is increased by depletion of stored calcium. So lead enters the astroglia neurons via voltage-sensitive calcium channels. So this disruption of our calcium hemostasis causes accumulation of calcium in lead exposed cells, and it will induce mitochondrial release of calcium, thus initiating apoptosis. So children with less developed blood-brain barrier has more accumulation of lead in the brain compared to adults in bones. High levels of lead concentration, which is more than 4 micromole, will cause acute encephalopathy, the blood-brain barrier damage, resulting in edema and ultimately brain ischemia. So other mechanisms of lead toxicity includes competition with and substitution of calcium, as I mentioned, disruption of calcium hemostasis, stimulation or release of calcium from mitochondria, while causing opening of mitochondria transition pores, directly damage the mitochondria and mitochondrial membranes. This causes inhibition of antioxidant enzyme and alteration in lipid metabolism. So substitution for zinc, it also causes substitution of zinc in various zinc-mediated processes. And lead cause accumulation in brain by astrocytes, causes sequestration and mobilization of lead from bone store with a long half-life in brain, lasting around 2 years and slowly released from the site of accumulation, causing lead neurotoxicity in children. So effect of lead toxicity, as I mentioned, apoptosis, excitotoxicity, decreased cellular energy metabolism, oxidative stress, altered regulation in gene transcription, lowered IQ, impaired neurophysical functioning, and at the end will cause impaired academic function in children. So among the problem poisoning that we can see here is that it will cause memory loss, lack of concentration, headache. In the digestive system, will cause constipation, nausea, poor appetite. In nervous system causes damage, including numbness, pain in the extremities. Body will cause fatigue, joint muscle pain. Cardiovascular causes high blood pressure. Kidney causes abnormal function and damage. And the reproductive system. In children, mostly will cause an effect on the brain, where behavioral problems will occur, lower IQ, hearing loss, and learning disabilities. And the body will cause decreased bone and muscle growth, and even nervous damage. I think with that, I'll thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hafiz. I hope you all enjoyed his fruitful presentation. Okay, now Dr. Hafiz will answer some questions that were sent to us in the chat box. So the first question is, why does children have mental health effect more than adult when exposed to plumbum? Plumbum is actually Latin word for lead, so it's the same thing. So Dr. Hafiz?
Okay. I would like to answer the first question. Okay. Question was, why does the children has more effect on the mental health compared to adults when exposed to lead? Okay, because in children, as we all know that through my presentation just now, absorption of children with lead does bring about to the blood-brain barrier, where the blood-brain barrier of a child is still immature, and lead will definitely interact with the calcium and the calcium ATPase channels and will enter to the brain more easily compared to an adult. So the lead will then accumulate in the brain and causing neuron and astroglial apoptosis. So when that occurs, lead will cause mental health problems. All right. Okay, actually from the presentation just now, as we all know that if lead is exposed to children, actually there's no safe limit for that, because there's no minimal risk limit. And as we all know that even though there is no safe limit, that the lowest level that is documented is less than 5 microgram per deciliter. That is under the WHO guideline. Okay. However, there is no minimal risk limit actually, and there's no safe limit for any child to be exposed to lead. And please prevent your child from being exposed to lead. Lead can be exposed to children in all forms. I think you might know that lead even occurs in toys that you buy for your children. It can be seen in playgrounds that they play on, all those paints that is painted on all the playgrounds equipments. So this, if lead that is exposed to children is lessened, reduced, I think we could reduce the exposure to children. Right.
Thank you for the question.
Okay, sorry. Sorry. Sorry for the okay. Sorry, yeah. So last question for Dr. Hafiz. What is the prevention and control for lead?
Okay, for lead per se, as we all know that lead is prevalent among a lot of things that we do in our daily life. So the first thing that we always do is that, like today, okay, today I drive my car to work, right? So the car needs fuel. So fuel that is used in our cars previously was leaded fuel. So if we prevent using leaded fuel, then we'll reduce a lot of usage of exposure to lead. That's one thing. Secondly, we buy toys to our children. So I have 2 children. So toys that we gave to our children, if it is a higher grade, then lead is less prevalent among the toys. Okay. Thirdly, in our houses that we paint, the paint that is used to paint our house. So if best to find paint that is higher in quality and has not much of lead, right? Thirdly, then when we see our wife, we'll definitely buy jewelries for our wife to present to them. So jewelries that is artificial are also leaded with lead. So we try to give them the best jewelry there is to prevent lead. And at the end of the day, me as an occupational health doctor, if your workplace actually has a lot of lead exposure, especially places where there is components of electronics, factories of electronics, or lead acid batteries, or battery factories, pregnant ladies should not be or should be prevented from attending to work and try to avoid lead in the workplace. This will definitely reduce the exposure to lead. All right. And at the end of the day, once your car broke down, you sell off your lead batteries away. Please do not keep your lead batteries at home. I think these are among the prevention and controls that I could discuss with you as time is constrained, and I will leave it back to our MC. Thank you very much for the questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hafiz. Sorry for the technical difficulties previously. So for those who unable to listen, not sure what the second question that I'm asking Dr. Hafiz just now is actually what is the safe level for plumbum for child or adult. Okay, so now we would like to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Saffinas, Syed Soffian. So Dr. Sharifah is also one of the candidate for Doctor of Public Health UKM, previously working in Jabatan Kesihatan Negeri Kedah. So Dr. Sharifah's topic of presentation will be on role of lead in mental health issue.
Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera to everyone. My name is Sharifah Saffinas binti Syed Soffian. On behalf of my team members, candidate of DrPH and SSKM UKM, we'll be sharing some interesting facts regarding the role of lead in mental health. The outline of the presentation will follow as such: the exposure to lead, autism spectrum disorder, schizophrenia, and conclusion. So I will start with the exposure to lead. To begin with, adults who are exposed to lead has been linked with depression, anxiety, panic disorder, reduced cognitive and response capacity, schizophrenia, Parkinson's disease, and Alzheimer's disease. A study that explored the association of cumulative exposure to lead found in topsoil and prevalence of mental disorder had observed a gradient effect for lead, whereby higher probabilities of having mental disorders as levels of exposure increase. The findings were strengthened among the people who consume vegetables more than once per day, of which there is presence of the soil pollutants as measured in the topsoil. Epidemiological studies revealed the higher rates of people living in a mining area in China as having obsessive compulsive behaviors, interpersonal sensitivity, depression, anxiety, paranoid ideation, and psychoticism when compared to the control population. So notwithstanding that, intrauterine exposure to lead in pregnant mothers was found associated with emotional and mental problems in their offspring. The exposure to lead during childhood was also linked to the development of impulsivity and depression in adolescents. Through this webinar, the two most common mental health problems related to lead will be discussed. Firstly is the autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a neurodevelopmental condition that is characterized by deterioration in communication and social interaction. It was estimated that 1 in every 160 children worldwide develop ASD, indicating the high prevalence of the disease. Common symptoms found in ASD include repetitive behaviors, difficulty in memory and focus, lowered cognitive ability, deficits in language, inability to distinguish feelings, and limited eye contact. A recent study by Sharo et al. Demonstrated that lower urinary lead excretion in ASD children compared to the typically developed children, which may be due to their poor detoxifying mechanism. The notion further support the cumulative neurotoxic effect of lead in ASD children. As has been mentioned earlier on the routes of lead upon entrance to the body, lead is being circulated into the bloodstream through skin ingestion and inhalation. They are then transported to the kidneys, bones, and brain. To link with the development of autism, lead inside the brain disrupts the dopaminergic system, cholinergic system, glutamatergic, and GABAergic system to a certain extent. Of its many effects, lead has been shown to hinder the release of acetylcholine in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for many cognitive and memory processes. Therefore, activation of cholinergic and muscarinic receptors will affect the cognitive and memory process. Besides that, lead has the ability to mimic calcium in binding to proteins and interfere with calcium-requiring process. Generally, lead prevents calcium ions from enter the axon terminal of nerve cells and inhibit the release of acetylcholinesterase. Lack of the acetylcholinesterase release may cause impaired cognitive ability and memory due to insufficient stimulation of the cholinergic and muscarinic receptors. So next is the impact on dopaminergic system. Dopaminergic neurons in the midbrain primarily concern with executive functioning that includes decision-making, social ability, and analytical skills. The dopamine neurotransmission is assisted by the dopamine transporter and protein kinase C for the reuptake of dopamine back to the presynaptic neuron. Studies show that autistic individuals have increased DAT that negatively impact their executive functioning. Moreover, lead enhances activation of PKC, resulted in neurological deficits of ASD children. Thirdly is the impact on the glutamatergic and GABAergic system. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter in brain that transmits signals between nerve cells. It has important role in learning and memory. Lead inhibit calcium channels and interfere the glutamatergic neurotransmission. Previous studies had linked the decreased expression of glutamatergic system and GABA receptors with autistic individuals. So moving on to the second mental health disorder, which is schizophrenia. So many local and international studies had shown the association between lead exposure and mental disorder, such as major depression, mood disorder, ADHD, and schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a developmental disorder in which both genes and environment come together to produce a schizophrenic phenotype later in life. The symptoms are grouped into positive, that is hallucinations, delusion, disorganized thinking, and negative, such as affective flattening, alogia, apathy, avolition, social withdrawal, and cognitive function deficits, of which is the core feature of the disorder. So the lead exposure begins as early as in the prenatal period, that associated with a significant increase in risk of schizophrenia later in life. Previous studies found a positive correlation between chronic early life lead exposure and psychotic experiences in adulthood, and a negative correlation with adult IQ. Typically, the clinical expression of schizophrenia begins in late adolescence or early adulthood, after which lifelong disability takes place. A multi-decade longitudinal study of lead-exposed children indicated that higher blood lead levels were associated with greater adult psychopathology and difficult personality traits. Recent study found that chronic early life lead exposure was associated with deficits in pre-pulse inhibition of the startle response, a schizophrenic endophenotype. So another common mechanism is the NMDA receptor hypofunction. GABAergic interneurons shape the functional maturation of the cerebral cortex, especially the prefrontal cortex. In adolescents, prefrontal cortex exhibit protracted development that defines the maturation of cognitive functions and affective responses in adults. Postmortem studies in the schizophrenic brain indicate the loss of cortical and hippocampal GABAergic interneurons, particularly those that contain the calcium binding protein. Above all, the hypofunction of NMDA receptors play a central role in the pathophysiology of schizophrenia. So the NMDA receptor hypofunction during brain development has been shown to result in the loss of cortical and hippocampal albumin and GABAergic interneurons that disrupt the excitatory and inhibitory balance, altering the network activity and circuit connectivity, leading to cognitive deficits. It plays an important role in the maturation and maintenance of protein levels in PVGI via activation of the brain-derived neurotrophic factor tropomyosin receptor kinase B system. This is consistent with the selective loss of PVGI in the schizophrenic brain. Thus, disruption of brain GABAergic circuits result from NMDA receptor hypofunction has emerged as a key player in the pathophysiology of cognitive dysfunction in schizophrenia. So in order to understand the putative association between chronic early life lead exposure and schizophrenia, the initial evidence showed that lead as a potent and selective inhibitor of the NMDA receptor and its exposure has altered the ontogeny of NMDA receptor subunits, disrupting the mechanism downstreaming signaling that leads to deficits in synaptic plasticity in the form of long-term potentiation in the hippocampus and impaired cognitive function. Long-term lead exposure dysregulates the normal developmental switch of protein subunit that contain the NMDAR, an event that is important for brain development and maturation of inhibitory brain circuits that include the PVGI. As for the conclusion, the full impact of lead exposure on the onset of neurodevelopmental disorders is not yet fully understood nor appreciated. However, lead exposure needs to be recognized as public health problem in the country due to the extensive irreversible effects it had since young generation. Further studies are needed to understand the underlying neurobiology to devise putative therapeutic strategies. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharifah. Okay, let's see if the audience have some question for Dr. Sharifah. Okay, so the first question, how to lower the risk of lead exposure in children?
Thank you for such a good question. Okay, For the question, how to lower the risk of exposure in children? Basically, young children, they are particularly vulnerable to the toxic effects of lead, and they can suffer profound and permanent adverse
Sorry, unfortunately our webinar experienced technical difficulties today. Please wait a moment. We are currently working to resolve the issue. Sorry. Okay. Actually our webinar technical.
Sorry for the technical issues.
A moment.
Can you hear me?
We are currently working to resolve.
So can you hear me now? All right. Okay. Thank you for such a good question just now regarding how to lower the risk of exposure of lead in children, right? Okay. Young children, they are particularly vulnerable to the toxic effects of lead, and they can suffer profound and permanent adverse health impacts, as in the case of autism disorder. Reducing the child's exposure to lead is the key. So among the important route of exposure in children, started off since in utero, during pregnancy, such as elevated maternal blood lead levels during pregnancy and breastfeeding, food and water contamination, toys, cosmetics, and even excess lead in parental occupations. So during pregnancy and lactation, mothers can have lead in their blood or breast milk for two reasons. Either they have been directly exposed to lead during pregnancy or lactation, or release of lead that is stored in a woman's bones and teeth from a prior exposure during pregnancy or lactation. So the only measure to lower the risk of lead exposure in children is to prevent the possible contact of lead. So learn about the source containing lead in the surrounding areas, keeping the children away from old windows, old porches, and areas with chipping or peeling paint. Practice regular hand washing, especially before eating, to avoid contamination through ingestion. Cleaning the home regularly so that children has less contact with hazardous chemicals. Prevent the habit of putting clay, soil, pottery, or paint chips into mouth, as they may be contaminated with lead. In circumstances that require some medical attention, blood levels monitoring may be beneficial. So another perspective of the impact on the mental health issue is the long-term exposure of lead that occurred during childhood, then will continue to develop schizophrenic endophenotype later in adult life. This has certainly contributed to the disability functioning of the adult life involved. So in another word is to prevent the exposure as early as we could, as early as we can, as the health impacts could persist into adult life of an individual. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sharifah. I think we should move on to the Kahoot session. Okay. For Kahoot session, the audience, I know they are already familiar with Kahoot, but I would like to advise the audience to use sorry. Okay, sorry, I just noticed a few questions in the chat box. So I would like to read the one from Vanita Turairasu. Okay, I would like to ask, can antidote therapy for lead improve the severity of conditions like autism spectrum disorder? And
Okay.
therapy for lead improve the
Thank
severity
you,
of
Dr. Rumaizah, for spelling out the question. Can antidote therapy for lead improve the severity of conditions like autism spectrum disorder? As for the antidote therapy, many has used chelation therapy to reverse the blood lead levels in the blood. But somehow this antidote therapy was not found to improve any comorbidities of the autism spectrum disorder, because once the lead has an impact on the neurodevelopmental process of a child, it is irreversible to a certain extent. That is also that is also another important issues to look at is to give a good nutrition to the child to avoid lead absorption, because we really need to prevent the exposure of lead during childhood.
Thank you, Dr. Sharifah. I will read another question by Arvinder Singh. How do we check for lead poisoning in infants or toddlers? Blood tests. So either Dr. Hafiz or Dr. Sharifah can answer.
Okay, Dr. Hafiz here, I will try to answer that question actually. For lead poisoning among infants or toddlers, it's best to do a blood heavy metal test. And we could also complement with a urine test. However, whatever it is that is we are suspecting of lead, we must have a sound, other than physical findings, we must have a sound family history, social history. We must really take a good history, background history of the child and the mothers and the fathers. Then once we suspect for lead poisoning among the infants or toddlers that we were suspecting perhaps mental disabilities and what's not, then we can go for heavy metal blood testing to test. And not forgetting that actually, if there is suspecting, if you are suspecting of a mental disability or mental development impairment, then perhaps the cases that you are suspecting is actually multifactorial, and please do not jump focusing only on lead. Perhaps there is another factors such as genetics that must be ruled out as well. Okay, I think that will answer that question. Okay, back to you, MC.
Okay, just another question from Supeng. How do we diagnose lead poisoning on children if there is not high degree of suspicion? And is lead poisoning common in Malaysia among children?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rumaizah. Thank you, Dr. Supeng, for asking the question. So I think I would like to answer that question. In Malaysia, lead poisoning is not as high prevalent as in the US or in another developed countries, because we are still lacking in terms of the detection, the monitoring, the surveillance program for lead. But somehow, in order to diagnose the children if there is not high degree of suspicion, basically what have been routinely done in the developed countries, specifically in the US, they had this blood monitoring levels for lead. For example, I give you an example, such as when they want to move into a new house, they will want to know whether their surrounding areas having certain lead levels in the environment. And secondly, in terms of the routine monitoring for occupation or some other health medical checkup, they will also go for the blood lead levels to to have a look whether they have at any level. But mind you that there is no certain safe blood levels for lead. So even there is a minute traces of lead in the blood is considered harmful. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sharifah, for answering the question. Okay, I think we now can move on to the next session, which is the Kahoot session. Okay, so for Kahoot session, I think the audience already familiar with the system. I just would like to advise the audience to use your real name, because the top 3 winners will win Ringgit Malaysia 100 cash each. So you can use your mobile phone or laptop. Okay, if using mobile phone, you can scan the code. It will lead you to the Kahoot web page. You can also Google Kahoot, go to the web page and type the game pin. Okay, so we'll now wait for audience to register into the system. So while we are waiting for the participant to register into the Kahoot, we'll just like to remind you guys that at the end of the session, we will give out the link for the e-certification, and also we will share you the QR code for CPD point that you can scan. Okay, but you can also do it manually as usual. Okay, there is we also provide the link for the Kahoot if you're having any problem in the chat box. So you can click on the link. Okay, we'll wait for another 2 minutes, okay, before we start the quiz. We hope you gain new knowledge today on LED. Okay, so okay, I think we want to start the Kahoot session now. Okay, so what is the atomic number of leads? Is it 28, 82, 50, or 18? Okay, the correct answer is 82. Next question. What is the commonest route of lead exposure in children? Is it inhalation, dermal, ingestion, or endogenous exposure? Okay, the correct answer is ingestion. Congrats to Mazna. Okay, choose one wrong statement. Urinary loss of lead makes up about 2/3 of total elimination. Infants and preschool children have faster lead elimination than adults, or fecal loss of lead makes up about 1/3 of total elimination, or infants and children retain 50% of ingested lead. The answer is infant and preschool children have faster lead elimination than adults. Okay, next question. Lead exposure during childhood may lead to mental illness in adolescents and adults. Is it true, false, or not sure? Okay, the answer is true. So let's see who reigned the top spot. Still Mazna, followed by Siti Khadijah and Shah. Next question. Excess lead in the body binds to white blood cell and disperses to various soft tissue, including kidney and brain. Is it true, false, or not sure? Unfortunately, another technical difficulties. Okay, the answer is false. Okay. Still Mazna Shah, and now we have new contender, Arvinder Singh. So let's go to our last question. There is no association between lead exposure and the development of ADHD in children and schizophrenia in adults. True, not sure, false. it's false. Okay, there is an association. So let's look at the podium. So third place, we have Arvinder Singh. Second place, Shah. I think we know who is it. Okay, the first place is Mazna. Congratulations to winners. We would like you to email your nickname, full name, and also mobile phone number to p10890@siswa.ukm.my. We have pasted the email in the chat box. Please reach us so that we can cash in your prizes. Okay. So it's almost the ending of the webinar, but before that, we would like to share you the QR code that you can scan for your e-certificate and also to claim your CPD points. So this actually, wait for the QR code, but you can also do it manually for CPD point, and you can click the link that we have given you in the chat box for the e-certificate. Please allow us for 3 days of working days to give you your e-certificate. Okay. Okay, now we are sharing you the QR code. You can scan. Okay, you can do the CPD point manually. It's up to you. So this concludes the webinar. Thank you all for attending. We hope you have learned and enjoyed this presentation. And we apologize for any inconvenience that happens today because of the technical issue. So have a great day. Oh, sorry. Okay, actually we would like to request for you all to open your video so we can take pictures. Okay, if anda sudi untuk membuka video anda, we would like to screenshot some pictures for those who attending today's webinar. Okay, are you guys ready? Dah ready dah? Okay, first we take the formal picture. So I count it. Okay, okay. 1, 2, 3. Just wait a moment. Okay. One more time. This is the formal one. So okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, wait. We have next page. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Now, can we have some freestyle? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, just wait. Another page. Okay, freestyle. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we managed to screenshot all your wonderful faces for today. Okay, we share again the QR code if there is anyone who haven't scanned for the e-certificate and for the CPD points. So have a great day, everyone. Assalamualaikum.